Hello, and welcome to another episode of Victorian America with a focus on women, which will be for the next two episodes where we'll just still focus on women. Today, we're really looking at whether or not women in society clinged on to these four ideals of womanhood: piety, purity, submissiveness, and domesticity. And before we get into going over the assignments that we're looking at in your homework, I want us to look at one interesting law. And it had to do with an image that we looked at the other day, the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice. They were so worried about not just, number two, pornographic, what we referred to, remember, as risque images when I was looking for stereoscope images of Victorian women. Just simply put, I mean, you just had more risque images showing up than the woman following the cult of domesticity. But also they were quite worried about the idea of contraception. So if you can prevent a pregnancy, or you can terminate a presidency, Freudian slip. If you can terminate a pregnancy through abortion, you'd be more likely to have sex if you're a man or a woman. And so the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice called for a law which was passed in 1873 that did these three things: made it illegal to send contraceptive devices through the mail, banned distribution of information about abortion, and made any pornographic images illegal. The Comstock law stays with us to this day, but I don't even know if it's called that. It's kind of been through so many permutations. It's the law where child pornography would be outlawed in today's society. But what I want you to kind of think about is the way you feel about child pornography, they felt about back then, but would have added in any sort of pornography about women or these things that could promote sex. So true or false? Does the Comstock law support, or did the Comstock law support Victorian values of the cult of domesticity? And I absolutely hope that you're seeing that, yes, it would go along with piety, purity, for sure. It follows that. And that brings us to, again, this. So now you see society following it, but does society always follow it? So what I want us to look at now is a video, and the video will go over two things. Number one, it will talk about Broadway in 1900. So this comes from a documentary series called 1900, so it only focuses on events from 1900. And I think we're going to be watching, and maybe have even watched, I think we watched the Filipino War video clip came from this series. So many things happen in 1900, and Broadway starts to take off, this idea of the theater. And the theater can be very proper, but it can also be risque. And so what I want you to do is look at your part 5, question 3, if you're in distance learning. And if you're not, I think you're in part 2, I think, in another packet. And I want you to tell me, after watching this clip from Sapho, what part showed society accepted the stricter values, and what parts showed that society maybe did not accept the values. And then we're going to come out and do a poll everywhere question, because not only are you going to watch about the Broadway play Sapho, but you're going to see one of the earliest motion pictures called The Kiss. So let me pause for a second. Actually, let's just do this. It'll be easier.
By 1900, New York was already the entertainment capital of America. And for a nickel or a dime, there was nothing more popular than vaudeville. There were the three Keatons, the 5-year-old Buster, Sandow, the strong man from Germany, and the juggler William Claude Dukenfield, better known as W.C. Fields. New York had more theaters than any place in the world. And that spring, a new play was appearing on Broadway that challenged the conventions of the day. Sapho drew sellout crowds and provoked the guardians of public morality. The popular English actress Olga Nethersall directed and starred in a story adapted from a French novel about a seductive woman with any number of lovers. The play created a scandal.
The scandalous part of Sapho was that at the end of the piece, Sapho was carried upstairs, clearly to a bedroom, and Sapho did not protest. She went willingly to have an illicit sexual relationship with a man, and she wasn't punished for it. And because the character wasn't punished in the play, Olga had to be punished in real life.
Olga was arrested and charged with violating public decency. She faced a stiff fine and a jail sentence.
Sapho hinted that women too were sexual creatures, and any hint that women could experience pleasure in sex was scandalous, was dangerous. And guardians of public morality were working overtime to stop peep shows, dime novels, picture postcards. There was just too much of it, and it was too cheap, it was too available.
In 1900, the New York Society for the Suppression of Vice proudly reported seizing more than 19,000 obscene photographs, 7,000 circulars, catalogs, songs, and poems. Now they went after Olga Nethersall. Her trial raged on for weeks, followed closely by every newspaper in the country. Among the witnesses was a police inspector who testified that in the line of duty, he had seen the play 6 times and had not found Sapho offensive at all. Other witnesses called the play instructive. In just 15 minutes, a sympathetic jury found Olga not guilty.
She was quickly let go. The show reopened, and the censors who had gotten it closed down succeeded only in expanding the audience far beyond what it would have been without the arrest.
New Yorkers were now seeing things in public places they'd never seen before. The Kiss, a 16-second film, created a sensation all over the city. At the turn of the century, film was still new. People were dazzled by any image that moved.
I want you to watch that again.
Public places they'd never seen before. The Kiss, a 16-second film, created a sensation all over the city. At the turn of the century, film was still new. People were dazzled by any image that moved.
The movies in 1900 were not what we would imagine today. They were really moving snapshots called views.
That's good enough. Now what I'd like us to do is pause for a moment and go into our poll everywhere and debrief about what you saw with Sapho and that somewhat disturbing kiss. And now we go to 2 other segments from the year 1900. One is about an artist named Charles Dana Gibson. And he had several drawings, which is, if you like them, you really should look online. The Gibson Girls are still popular to this day. They're not that expensive to find on eBay. This is part 5, question 4A. And you can see the question is, how do the following topics challenge the expected roles of women in Victorian America? The Gibson Girls video will go right into the video on Francis Benjamin Johnston. And you can see her here sitting on a box, it looks like, with some portraits on the mantle above her. And I want you to think about how both of those challenged the accepted norms of Victorian America. And that is another video that we're going to watch. This one is here.
Just a song at twilight when the lights are low and the flickering shadows softly come and softly go. Though the heart be weary.
In the winter of 1900, the most popular girl in America was the Gibson Girl.
Still to us at twilight.
She was cool, flirtatious,
Comes love's old
every red-blooded American man's ideal.
comes love.
Pinned on the walls of homes across the country, from dormitories at Harvard to miners' cabins in the far west, the Gibson Girls set the standard for a generation of American women. She had elegance and style. She appeared independent and in control, dominating men with her seductive wiles. But the Gibson Girl was a fantasy of a New York magazine illustrator named Charles Dana Gibson. In reality, most women, by law and custom, were dependent upon men. In some states, a woman couldn't own property. Everything she earned belonged to her husband. And in every state but 4, she was refused the vote. A woman's only hope was to make a good marriage. But a few women were striking out on their own, choosing careers instead of husbands. Francis Benjamin Johnston was a 36-year-old photographer, pioneering a new career for women in photojournalism. President McKinley posed for her camera, just as Grover Cleveland had 6 years before. Anyone who was anyone in Washington society wanted Johnston to take her picture.
Upper-class, talented, energetic white women like Johnston are knocking at the door of social power and professional power in the United States. Women at the turn of the century, like Johnston, are beginning to come out from the shadow of men. They are demanding careers. They're trying to come out from their home, and photography is Johnston's way of doing that. Johnston's saying, I am a photographer, I can have a business. I'm not going to be a housekeeper. I'm not going to be a wife. I'm not going to have that feminine role. She's saying, I'm going to be as good a professional photographer as any man.
Johnston had studied painting in France, then began drawing illustrations for newspapers before switching to photography. Photography, she wrote, was the more accurate medium.
This is a new era for photography. A way of printing photographs in the illustrated press has just been invented. And people like Johnston are trying to figure out now what photography is for. She's getting commissioned by magazines to discover how you can use a camera to do photo documentary.
By 1900, photographs were replacing illustrations in the popular press. and Johnston was helping define a new profession, photojournalism, showing Americans pictures of themselves they had never seen before. Johnston traveled across the country, leaving a telling record of the people of her day. Coal miners in Pennsylvania, sailors returning from the Spanish-American War, immigrants pouring into New York City, black college students in Virginia, sharecroppers in the South. Johnston's portraits introduced Americans to the faces of the famous men and women of her time. War heroes Admiral Dewey and Colonel Theodore Roosevelt. The educator Booker T. Washington. Inventor Alexander Graham Bell. Scientist George Washington Carver. Mark Twain. Andrew Carnegie. And Susan B. Anthony.
I'm amazed at her appetite for recording the people of her day, how much she traveled, how often she tracked down any opportunity to take pictures.
In a series of photographs taken at a shoe factory in Lynn, Massachusetts, Johnston challenged the idealized image of women at the turn of the century. The women of Lynn spent their days in foul-smelling rooms, the floors soaked with chemicals, the air reeking with poisonous fumes. They worked 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, and earned less than $32 a month, barely enough to put food on the table.
Johnston's images of women working in factories look slightly bedraggled, they look tired, but they look very alive and human. They don't look discouraged. They look hopeful. Johnston's photographs have the same kind of pluck that Johnston had and knew in herself. Johnston's finding the vitality in America. And that's very much the spirit of the age, the vision of America which can move into the next century, sure of itself, confident, believing that its dreams, if not true at the moment, will come true.
Well, I think what we need to do at this point is go into some breakout rooms and talk, or be in class and talk about how those answers, how the Gibson Girls and Francis Benjamin Johnston should be answered for you. And so I'm going to pause for a second. I'm going to look at the Gibson Girls one more time and Francis Benjamin Johnston one more time and hit pause. Okay, if we come back, I hope you had a good discussion about the Gibson Girls. What I'd like to point out about Francis Benjamin Johnston is that she was considered a new woman. Not only did she have a job, but she photographed women having jobs, like you saw at the end, which is very much against the concept of domesticity. But also, Johnston was out as a gay lesbian woman and had a lifelong partner who she moved to Paris with and opened a photography shop, so to speak, traveled the world. You could see had an appetite for information that really didn't fit. But if you look at this image here, you might go, no, she fits the cult of domesticity because of various things. But if you look a little closer at it, she worked, she smoked. You can see that cigarette right there in her right hand. She drank, that's what's in her left hand, a German beer stein. She didn't get married, they said in the video, but she actually lived with her female partner. And what I love about her photography is she showed what was missing from the Centennial Mirror. Black students in Virginia, sharecroppers, immigrants, people working in factories, people moving out to the West, women being what they, what they wanted to be. A famous American scientists like George Washington Carver, who everyone thinks, oh, he invented peanut butter. Well, yeah, he did that, but what he did, I mean, so that you guys don't forget just how amazing he was to all of society in the South, but especially to black and poor white sharecroppers, was he said, we're too dependent on cotton. We need another crop. So I've got to prove that there are many things you can do with this crop that doesn't leach the soil like cotton does. And so, you come up with 217 uses for the peanut. And that ends some farmers' reliance on cotton, which ultimately, if you stay on the same soil, will ruin it. And she's capturing that idea that here is a successful professional Black man who's helping white and Blacks in the South. So she's very much the antithesis of the Centennial Mirror, but also the antithesis of what people would have thought the South should be. And I have one more question. As long as we're talking about women working, can you name for me one of the most common paying jobs that women had, paying, like you got paid in money, at the beginning of the 1900s? You can type your answer in. You can say it out loud. I'll hit pause. And if you said domestic work, being a maid, being a nanny, working in a textile factory, you guys just saw that, being a teacher, and a telephone operator. You guys, telephones, I'm actually going to hit pause because I want you guys to see this. So these are women working at a switchboard in New York City in roughly 1900. Their job is to connect people from various parts of the world to New York, or to help be a connector from New York to Davis, California. So let's say I pick up my phone in Davis, California. It would ring at one of these stations at the operator in Davis, California. And the lady would answer and I'd say, hi, I want to talk to my cousin, Chris Biggins in New York City. And they'd say, great, it'll take a few minutes. And they would call an operator in San Francisco and they'd all be on the same line. Then the San Francisco operator would have a direct line to maybe New York. Maybe there was a direct line to New York. And so it might take a few minutes for you to actually get in contact, but every one of these switches was connected. That's how phones worked back then. You needed someone to manually hook you up to someone else's phone. So you can just begin to imagine how many people this takes to work. And you can see in this image that they're all women. So we go back one more time and you say, Francis Benjamin Johnston is doing a job, yes, but it's not a common job. The common jobs would have been domestic work, textile factory teacher, and telephone operator. And I'm hoping by now someone said, Karen boy, because there he is, he got replaced on the mantle. Look, we went Francis Benjamin Johnston, and then he showed up. Ha! Oh boy, Miss Johnston took a picture of me. She didn't, but I always thought that that would be funny if she had. So speaking of photojournalism, while Francis Benjamin Johnston certainly pioneered it, she wasn't the most famous female photojournalist. That certainly belongs to Dorothea Lange and her images of not only the Depression, but World War II are very significant in the historical record. Her Depression photos, and this one being called Migrant Mother, taken down near Santa Barbara in California. Nipomo, I think is the name of the place this was taken. Her images of World War II, especially of the shipyards in Richmond, California, are really something to see because they also portray, much like Francis Benjamin Johnston, this other part of life. So you get the Great Depression, you've got the fear of people in the Depression, you've got African Americans working in the shipyards, women working in the shipyards in Richmond, California. So Dorothea Lange really is the successor. She stood on the shoulders of women like Francis Benjamin Johnston, who weren't afraid to work despite the values of the time. And that is going to lead us to our topic, which really talks about that, which is women's suffrage.